The ballroom glittered with a kind of excess that made Elena's stomach turn, though whether from nerves or the nausea that had plagued her for weeks, she couldn't say. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across marble floors, illuminating women in gowns that cost more than most people's annual salaries, and men in tailored suits that screamed power. Champagne flowed from fountains, servers glided between clusters of guests with trays of delicacies she couldn't name, and at the center of it all, on a raised platform decorated with white roses and gold ribbon, stood her husband with his arm around another woman. Elena pressed her hand against her abdomen, a protective gesture that had become instinctive over the past few days, and felt the envelope containing the divorce papers crinkle inside her coat pocket. 3 years. 3 years of being Alessandro Marchetti's wife, of sleeping in his bed and wearing his ring, and pretending she didn't notice the way he looked through her, rather than at her. 3 years of being invisible in her own marriage, and now he was replacing her with someone who fit better into this world of crystalline beauty and calculated smiles. The woman beside him was stunning in the way that money could buy. Professionally styled blonde hair, a designer gown in champagne silk that hugged curves, that had never known pregnancy or hardship, jewelry that caught the light with every practiced gesture. She laughed at something Alessandro said, tilting her head in a way that displayed the elegant line of her throat, and even from across the room, Elena could see the adoration in her eyes when she looked at him. Elena had never looked at Alessandro like that, had never been able to summon that kind of worshipful devotion for a man who'd married her for convenience and treated her like a particularly forgettable piece of furniture. "Ma'am, can I check your coat?" A server appeared at her elbow, young and professionally neutral, and Elena shook her head. "I won't be staying long." She moved through the crowd with her shoulders squared and her chin lifted, wearing her only good dress, a simple black sheath that had fit perfectly a month ago, and now strained slightly across her breasts and hips. No one looked at her. These people, Alessandro's people, had perfected the art of seeing only what mattered, and Elena Marchetti had never mattered. Not to them, not to her husband. The platform where Alessandro stood was surrounded by well-wishers, men in expensive suits, clapping him on the shoulder, and women air-kissing his fiancée's cheeks. Elena recognized some of them: business associates, family members, the occasional politician who thought his wealth could wash away the stain of Alessandro's reputation. They formed a barrier between her and the man she'd come to confront, but she pushed through anyway, ignoring the startled looks and whispered comments that followed in her wake. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice cutting through the congratulatory murmurs. "I need to speak with my husband." The word, husband, landed like a stone in still water. Conversations died. Heads turned. Alessandro's attention, which had been fixed on the blonde woman beside him, shifted slowly to Elena's face, and for the first time in months, he actually looked at her. Really looked at her, his dark eyes moving over her features, with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness she didn't want to feel. "Elena!" Her name in his mouth sounded like an accusation. "What are you doing here?" "Delivering something you need to sign." She pulled the envelope from her coat pocket, the papers inside representing 6 months of legal work and every penny of her meager savings. "Divorce papers. I thought you'd want them before you made your engagement official." The blonde woman's smile had frozen into something brittle. Around them, the crowd shifted and whispered, sensing drama the way sharks sensed blood in water. Alessandro's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the close-cropped beard that gave him the look of a Renaissance prince. Beautiful and dangerous, and entirely untouchable. "This is neither the time nor the place," he said, his voice low and controlled in the way that meant his temper was barely leashed. "I disagree." Elena held out the envelope, her hand steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "You've made your intentions clear. This just makes them legal." He didn't take the papers. Instead, his gaze dropped from her face, traveling down her body in a slow assessment that felt invasive and intimate all at once. Elena watched his eyes catch on the swell of her breasts, linger on the slight curve of her stomach that she'd tried to hide with the drape of her coat, and then snap back to her face with an expression she couldn't decipher. "We'll discuss this privately." Not a request. Alessandro stepped down from the platform, movements fluid and controlled, and caught her elbow in a grip that looked gentle from a distance, but felt like iron. "If you'll excuse us," he said to the crowd at large, his public smile never wavering. "My wife and I have some matters to attend to." He guided her through the ballroom with the ease of a man accustomed to moving through crowds that parted for him automatically. Elena tried to pull free once, but his grip only tightened, a silent warning that she'd already caused enough of a scene. They exited through a side door into a corridor lined with doors, the sounds of the party fading behind them as Alessandro steered her into what appeared to be a private study, all dark wood and leather furniture and windows overlooking the city lights. He released her the moment the door closed, stepping back as if her proximity burned. "What the fuck was that?" "That was me refusing to be humiliated any further." Elena dropped the envelope onto his desk, the sound sharp in the tense silence. "You want to marry someone else? Fine. Sign the papers, and we can both move on with our lives." "You show up at my engagement party, announce our divorce in front of my associates and family, and you think I'm the one humiliating you?" Alessandro's voice had risen, losing some of that careful control. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" "What I should have done months ago." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the coat she still wore. "This marriage is a joke, Alessandro. It always has been. You married me because your grandfather wanted you settled, and I married you because—" She stopped, swallowing the bitter truth that she'd been desperate and stupid and had actually believed him when he'd promised to try to make it work. It doesn't matter why. What matters is that it's over. He was staring at her again with that same intense focus, and this time she watched him process what his eyes were telling him. Watched understanding dawn in his expression, followed by something that looked almost like shock. "You're pregnant." Not a question. Elena's hand went instinctively to her stomach, protective and defiant all at once. "Yes." "How far along?" 10 weeks. She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes with every ounce of courage she possessed. "And before you ask, yes, it's yours. There's been no one else." The silence that followed felt suffocating. Alessandro stood utterly still, his face gone carefully blank in the way it always did when he was processing something unexpected. Outside the study, the party continued, music and laughter drifting through the walls. But in here, the world had narrowed to just the two of them, and the revelation hanging between them like a live wire. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice had gone quiet, almost gentle, and somehow that was worse than the anger. "When would you have liked me to tell you?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended. "During one of our monthly dinners where we sit across from each other and pretend to be a normal couple? Or maybe in passing when you come home at 3 in the morning and I pretend to be asleep? We don't talk, Alessandro. We barely exist in the same space anymore." "That's not—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair in a rare gesture of frustration that disrupted its perfect styling. "We could have discussed this, made arrangements." "Arrangements?" The word tasted bitter. "Is that what you call planning your engagement to another woman while your wife is pregnant? Making arrangements? Vittoria is—" He stopped again, and something flickered across his face that might have been guilt. "It's complicated." "It's really not." Elena moved to the desk, tapped the envelope with one finger. "Sign the papers. Let me go. Marry your uncomplicated blonde, and we'll figure out custody arrangements for the baby." "No!" The single word fell between them with the weight of a verdict. Elena stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "I said no." Alessandro moved then, closing the distance between them with predatory grace, and Elena found herself backing up until her hips hit the desk. He didn't touch her, but he was close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, feel the heat radiating from his body. "You're my wife. You're carrying my child. I'm not signing anything." "You don't get to decide that." Her voice came out breathier than she'd intended, and she hated herself for the way her body responded to his proximity. The traitorous flutter in her stomach, the awareness prickling across her skin. "This marriage is over. You made that choice when you put a ring on another woman's finger." "I haven't married her. Yet." "Elena." Her name in his mouth sounded different now, weighted with something she couldn't identify. "You don't understand the situation." "Then explain it to me." She pressed her palms flat against the desk behind her, needing the solid support. "Make me understand why you're throwing an engagement party while your wife is at home pregnant and alone." He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze searching her face as if looking for something he'd lost. "The engagement to Vittoria was arranged by my father before he died. A business merger disguised as a marriage. I've been trying to find a way out of it for months. And yet here we are, at your engagement party." "Here we are," he agreed, "because her family gave me an ultimatum. Honor the agreement or face consequences that would destroy everything my father built." His hand came up, hesitated, then settled against her cheek with a gentleness that made her chest ache. "I've been trying to protect you by keeping you separate from this, by making sure you weren't caught in the crossfire when things inevitably went wrong." "By ignoring me? By making me feel like a ghost in my own home?" "By keeping you safe." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and she hated how much she wanted to lean into the touch. "This world I live in, Elena, it's dangerous. The less visible you were, the less of a target you became. I thought I was doing the right thing." "You were doing the easy thing." She turned her face away from his hand, breaking the contact even though it felt like tearing away from warmth. "You've been planning your exit strategy since the day we got married. And now that there's a baby involved, suddenly you care?" "I've always cared." The rawness in his voice surprised her. "I'm just terrible at showing it." "So show me now." She looked back at him and let him see everything. The hurt, the loneliness, the desperate hope she'd tried so hard to bury. "Sign the papers and let me go, or tell that woman out there that the engagement is off. You don't get to keep us both." Alessandro's hand dropped away from her face, and for a moment she thought he would step back, would retreat into that cold distance that had characterized their entire marriage. Instead, he moved closer, his body crowding hers against the desk, one hand, braced on either side of her hips, caging her in without quite touching. "I choose you." The words were barely above a whisper, but they hit her with the force of a shout. "I choose you and our baby. I'll deal with Vittoria's family, deal with the consequences. But I'm not letting you go." "You can't just decide." "I can, and I am." He leaned in, his forehead nearly touching hers, and the intensity in his eyes stole her breath. 3 years, Elena. 3 years I've kept you at a distance, because I was terrified of what it would mean to let you close. Terrified that if I loved you, my enemies would use you against me. Terrified that I'd turn into my father, a man who destroyed everything he touched, including the woman he claimed to love. "Alessandro!" "Let me finish." His voice had gone rough, stripped of its usual careful control. "I thought I was protecting you, but all I did was hurt you. Push you away until you felt like you didn't matter, when the truth is you're the only thing that's mattered to me in years." His hand came up again, settling over hers where it pressed against her stomach. "And now there's a baby. Our baby. And I'll be damned if I let you walk away without fighting for this. For us." Elena wanted to push him away, wanted to hold on to her anger like a shield. But underneath the hurt was something else. 3 years of watching him from a distance, of noticing the rare moments when his guard slipped and she glimpsed the man beneath the cold exterior. 3 years of wanting more and telling herself to be satisfied with less. 3 years of loving a man who wouldn't let himself be loved. I don't know if I can trust you, she said finally, the admission scraping her throat raw. Then let me earn it. He shifted closer still, until their bodies aligned and she could feel the solid strength of him against her. Let me prove that I can be the husband you deserve, the father our child deserves, however long it takes. And Vittoria? I'll handle it tonight. The promise in those words felt absolute. I'll make it clear that the engagement is off, that it was never real to begin with. My wife is the only woman I'm marrying. You hurt me. The tears she'd been fighting threatened to spill over. You made me feel invisible, worthless. I know. His other hand came up to cup her face, tilting her head back so she had no choice but to meet his eyes. And I will spend the rest of my life making up for it, if you'll let me. Please, Elena, don't give up on us yet. She should be stronger than this, should push him away and walk out with her dignity intact. But she was so tired of being alone, so tired of pretending she didn't want exactly what he was offering. And beneath all the hurt and anger was the undeniable truth. She loved him, had loved him even when he'd made it impossible, even when every interaction felt like bleeding slowly. I'm not signing the papers, she heard herself say. The relief that washed over his face transformed him, erasing years of careful control and revealing something younger, more vulnerable beneath. Thank you. But I'm not staying in that house alone anymore. She lifted her chin, reclaiming some of her strength. And I'm not being hidden away like some shameful secret. If we're doing this, if we're really trying, then things have to change. They will. He leaned in, pressing his forehead against hers in a gesture of intimacy they'd never shared before. I promise you they will, starting tonight. What are you going to tell her, Vittoria? The truth. Alessandro pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. That I'm married to a woman I don't deserve, who's giving me a gift I never expected, and that no business arrangement is worth losing her. She's not going to take it well. Neither is her family. A grim smile touched his mouth. But that's my problem to solve, not yours. Your only job right now is to take care of yourself and our baby. Our baby! Elena pressed her hand over his, where it still rested on her stomach. I can't believe this is real. Any of it. Believe it. He dipped his head, his lips brushing her forehead, with a tenderness that made her chest ache. I'm not the man I should be, Elena, but I want to be. For you. For this child. I want to be better. Then be better. She pulled back to look at him fully, letting him see the steel beneath her vulnerability. Don't just promise. Actually do it. Show me that this isn't just words. I will. He straightened, and she watched him slide back into the role he wore so easily, the powerful man who commanded rooms and built empires. But now she'd seen beneath it, seen the uncertainty and the longing he kept so carefully hidden. Stay here. I need to make an announcement. I'm coming with you. Elena. No? She pushed off the desk, standing her ground even though her legs felt shaky. You said you weren't going to hide me anymore. So don't. I'm your wife. I'm pregnant with your child. Let everyone see. Something fierce and possessive flashed across his face. You're sure? It's going to be ugly. I'm sure. She reached for his hand, threaded her fingers through his, with a confidence she was only half faking. We face it together, or not at all. He looked down at their joined hands, and when he met her eyes again, there was something new in his expression. Respect, maybe, or the beginning of something that looked like love. Together, then. They walked back to the ballroom, side by side, and this time the crowd didn't part easily. People stared openly now, tracking their progress with undisguised curiosity. The music had stopped, and conversations died as they made their way to the platform where Vittoria still stood, her perfect smile growing strained as she watched them approach. Alessandro didn't let go of Elena's hand as he stepped onto the platform, pulling her up beside him with a possessive certainty that sent whispers rippling through the crowd. Elena kept her chin lifted, her free hand resting protectively over her stomach, and tried to ignore the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alessandro said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom, "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. This isn't an engagement party." He looked directly at Vittoria, and Elena saw genuine regret in his eyes. "I apologize for any confusion or hurt this may have caused. But I can't marry you. I'm already married to the only woman I want." Vittoria's face cycled through shock, hurt, and then hardened into fury. "You can't be serious." "I am. The arrangement between our families is void." He turned to face the crowd, and his hand tightened on Elena's. "My wife is expecting our first child, and I have no intention of dishonoring my marriage vows or my family. Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to take it up with me directly." The silence that followed was absolute. Elena watched faces in the crowd, some sympathetic, others scandalized, a few calculating the political and financial ramifications of this public rejection. Vittoria stood frozen on the platform, her carefully constructed poise crumbling as the reality of the situation sank in. "You'll regret this," she said finally, her voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. "My family doesn't forgive betrayal." "Then they'll have to learn." Alessandro's voice had gone cold, all the warmth he'd shown Elena in the study locked away behind his public mask. "Security will escort you out. I suggest you leave with dignity." Vittoria looked at Elena then, really looked at her for the first time, and the hatred in her eyes was palpable. "You think you've won something? You think he'll actually change? He's incapable of it. You'll spend the rest of your life married to a man who can't love anything more than his power." "That's enough." Alessandro moved, positioning himself slightly in front of Elena in a protective gesture that felt instinctive. "Marcus, please escort Ms. Gallo to her car." The same man who'd served as Alessandro's bodyguard appeared from the crowd, his expression professionally neutral as he offered Vittoria his arm. She ignored it, stepping down from the platform with her head high and her fury evident in every rigid line of her body. The crowd parted for her, and Elena watched her disappear through the ballroom doors with a mixture of relief and dread. When she was gone, the crowd erupted, not in applause, but in a surge of conversation that rose like a tide, washing over them with speculation and judgment. Alessandro guided Elena off the platform, moving through the masses with single-minded purpose until they reached a quieter alcove near the windows. "Are you all right?" he asked, and the concern in his voice sounded genuine. "I think so." Elena pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat slowly returning to normal. "That was necessary." He cupped her face in both hands, his touch gentle despite the tension still coiled in his frame. "And now everyone knows. You're not hidden anymore. You're not invisible. You're my wife, and you're carrying my child, and anyone who wants to challenge that will have to go through me." "What happens now?" "Now we leave." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, lingering and sweet. "We go home, our home, and we start figuring out how to actually be married." "Just like that?" "Just like that." He pulled back to smile at her, and it transformed his face into something boyish and hopeful. "Unless you'd rather stay and enjoy the party?" Despite everything, the drama, the confrontation, the uncertainty of what came next, Elena found herself laughing. "I think I've had enough excitement for one night." "Then let's go home." He kept her hand in his as they walked toward the exit, and this time, when people stared, Elena didn't shrink from their gazes. She was Alessandro Marchetti's wife. She was carrying his child, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt like she might actually belong in this glittering, dangerous world. The ride home was quiet, Alessandro's hand resting on her thigh in a gesture that felt both possessive and protective. Elena watched the city lights blur past the window and tried to process everything that had happened in the space of an hour. She'd walked into that party expecting to end her marriage. Instead, she might have actually saved it. When they arrived at the house, the massive estate she'd never quite felt comfortable calling home, Alessandro helped her from the car with a solicitousness that was entirely new. He kept his hand on the small of her back as they walked through the front door, past the staff who tried not to stare, and up the stairs to the master suite they'd shared in body, but never in spirit. "I need to make some calls," he said when they reached the bedroom. "Handle the fallout from tonight. But I want you to rest. You've been through enough." "Alessandro." She caught his arm before he could leave. "What you said tonight about choosing us, did you mean it?" He turned to face her fully, and the expression in his eyes was more open than she'd ever seen it. "Every word. I know I haven't given you reason to trust me. I know I've been a terrible husband. But I meant what I said in that study. You matter to me, Elena, more than I knew how to admit." "I'm scared." The admission felt like surrender. "I'm scared this is temporary, that once the initial shock wears off, you'll go back to treating me like I'm invisible." "I won't." He pulled her against him, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that felt like safety. "I can't promise I'll always get it right. I'm not good at this, at relationships, at letting people in. But I promise I'll try. Every day, I'll try to be the man you need." Elena let herself sink into his warmth, breathing in his scent and feeling the solid strength of him against her. This wasn't the fairy tale ending she'd imagined when she'd married him 3 years ago. It was messier, more complicated, tinged with the reality of the dangerous world he inhabited and the broken trust between them. But it was real, and maybe, just maybe, it was enough to build something lasting on. "Okay," she whispered against his chest. "We'll try." His arms tightened around her, and she felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. "Get some rest. I'll be back soon." But after he left to make his calls, Elena found she couldn't sleep. She changed into comfortable clothes, wandered through the suite that had always felt too large and impersonal, and eventually found herself in the sitting room with her hand pressed to her stomach. The baby, their baby, was real now in a way it hadn't been before. Real to Alessandro. Real as a catalyst for change. She thought about the expression on his face when he'd looked at her stomach, the possessive way he'd placed his hand over hers, and felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Maybe they could do this. Maybe they could build something real from the ruins of their hollow marriage. It wouldn't be easy. There would be conversations they'd avoided for 3 years, truths they'd have to confront, compromises they'd have to make. But for the first time since she'd seen those 2 lines on the pregnancy test, Elena felt something other than fear. She felt hope. When Alessandro returned an hour later, he found her curled in an armchair by the window, watching the moonlight paint patterns across the manicured grounds. He'd shed his jacket and tie, rolled up his sleeves, and there was a weariness in his face that made him look almost human. "Vittoria's family is making threats," he said without preamble. "Nothing we can't handle, but it's going to be ugly for a while." "I'm sorry." And she meant it. Despite everything. "Don't be." He crossed to her, pulled her gently to her feet, and led her to the bed. "This is my mess to clean up. Your only job is to take care of yourself and our baby." He helped her into bed with a tenderness that felt new and fragile, then surprised her by sliding in beside her. For 3 years, they'd shared this bed while maintaining careful distance, each staying on their own side like strangers. But now, Alessandro pulled her against his chest, wrapping his arms around her with a possessiveness that should have felt suffocating, but instead felt like coming home. "Is this okay?" he asked, his voice rumbling beneath her ear. "Yes." She settled against him, feeling her body relax in ways it hadn't in months. "This is okay." They lay in the darkness, and Elena listened to his heartbeat slow as exhaustion claimed him. Just before she drifted off, she felt his hand slide down to rest protectively over her stomach, and heard him whisper words she wasn't sure she was meant to hear. "I'll be better, for both of you, I promise." And lying there in his arms, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest, and the gentle weight of his hand on their child, Elena let herself believe him.